The Great Hall was alive with the type of chatter that Myrtle had come to associate with the beginning or end of term feast. However, this was a Tuesday in the middle of March, and instead of cheerful greetings from old friends, there was a palpable sense of nerves, not only from the students, but the staff as well. Myrtle glanced up to where the staff table usually sat, but instead it had been replaced by a giant golden stage with thousands of candles above it. At the front of the stage stood Professor Dibbit, who was nervously twirling his lime green bowler hat, and to his right were Professors McGonagall and Dumbledore, who were both deep in conversation and looking extremely grave. Suddenly, the chatter amongst the students died down. Myrtle turned around to locate the cause of the silence and saw 7 Slytherin boys entering the Great Hall, 6 of whom were surrounding a single boy, as if they were the guard for the Muggle Prime Minister. Students nervously moved out of the Slytherin boys' way, as if they would be burned if they got too close. As the gang passed Myrtle, one of the boys caught her eye and gave a low hissing sound. Not unaccustomed to rude gestures from other students, Myrtle didn't think anything of it. The group of boys made their way to the far side of the hall, and as they sat down, Myrtle was able to get a better look at the boy in the middle. He was tall, handsome, and had an expressionless look on his face, as though he was the only person in Hogwarts who had not heard of the 4 attacks that happened that week. A large P on his robes signified that he was a prefect. As Myrtle gazed at the handsome boy's features, a tiny cough from the front stage made her jump and turn around to see Professor Dibbit, who began to speak. "Good morning, students. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that there have been several mysterious attacks this week. The staff and I thought it would be a good idea to start a little dueling club, where every student can learn the basics of defensive magic. Professor Dumbledore has been kind enough to offer to teach this class, and I'm sure you will all give him your full respect and attention. Professor Dumbledore, if you would like to take it away." Dumbledore gave a slight bow to Professor Dibbit and walked to the center of the stage. One of the boys next to Myrtle nudged his friend and whispered, "I think I'd rather have his pal Grindelwald teaching us, wouldn't you?" Both boys laughed quietly to themselves as Dumbledore began to speak. "Thank you very much, Professor Dibbit, for that kind introduction. Now, for many of our older students, what you learn here may seem like old hat, but I cannot stress enough how important it is for every student to learn, practice, and master the basics of defensive magic. I think it would be best if we started off with a demonstration of what a proper duel looks like. And I couldn't think of a better person to join me in this exhibition than our very own 4-time Hogwarts dueling champion, Tom Riddle." If the Great Hall was quiet beforehand, it was nothing compared to the deafening silence that fell upon the students as Riddle's name was called. Every head in the room spun toward the group of Slytherin boys at the far end of the hall. The Slytherin boys turned toward the handsome boy with the prefect's badge. This, Myrtle thought to herself, must be Tom Riddle. Riddle did not move at first. He had been blankly staring into space, as though he found Dumbledore's words unworthy of his attention. "Tom, would you please join me on stage?" Dumbledore asked, in a slightly less gentle tone. Riddle got up without looking at Dumbledore. He glided through the sea of students as if his feet weren't even touching the ground. As he passed Myrtle, an unnatural chill ran down her spine. Tom walked onto the stage and stood facing Dumbledore, with about 10 yards distance between them. "Thank you very much, Tom," said Dumbledore with a warm smile, and he turned to face the rest of the students. "Now, can anyone tell me what must happen before every duel?" A third-year girl from Hufflepuff shot her hand up instantly. "Yes, Miss Lovegood?" asked Dumbledore. "Before every duel, you must bow to your opponent." "Correct," said Dumbledore. 10 points to Hufflepuff. Bowing to your opponent is a sign of respect that must be shared between the two duelists. And Dumbledore turned back to Tom and gave him a deep bow. But Riddle didn't move. "Come on, Tom. The niceties must be observed. Please bow." Riddle barely inclined his head, but Dumbledore seemed to think that was the best he was going to get, and he turned back to the rest of the students and said, "And now—" But before he could finish his sentence, Riddle made a violent slashing movement with his wand, and a jet of purple light shot right at Dumbledore. With almost superhuman reflexes, Dumbledore blocked Riddle's spell without even looking at him. Dumbledore turned back to Tom and looked at him as though he was appraising his options. Just when Myrtle thought Dumbledore was going to give Tom detention, Dumbledore waved his wand like a whip and shot a jet of orange light right back at Riddle, who blocked it with as much ease as Dumbledore had. And before anyone knew what was happening, Riddle and Dumbledore were in an all-out duel, their wands flashing like swords, barely visible in the midst of whirring colors and sound. It was like watching a beautiful tennis rally. Every head in the hall moved back and forth in unison with every spell cast. Then, suddenly, with a jet of green light, a 6-foot python shot out of the end of Dumbledore's wand. Riddle stopped mid-spell and stared down at the snake. It was slowly slithering towards Tom, but without any menace. Dumbledore peered at Tom over his half-moon spectacles with a shrewd and calculating look, and for the first time, Riddle looked nervous. But he immediately composed himself, pointed his wand at the snake, and whispered, "Vipera Ivanesca." The snake vanished with a puff of black smoke. For what seemed like an eternity, everyone in the Great Hall stood there in silence. Dumbledore was gazing at Tom, and Tom was staring at the place where the snake had disappeared. Then, as if nothing had happened, Dumbledore turned toward the rest of the students and said, "Thank you all so much for listening to my story, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, I'd really appreciate if you hit the like and subscribe buttons. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time."